I didn't expect to feel that strange kind of quiet after getting discharged. Not relief, not happiness, just quiet. The kind that settles into your apartment when you've been surrounded by noise for too long, machines, footsteps, voices that aren't yours. And then suddenly, nothing. I stood in the middle of my living room that first evening, keys still in my hand, trying to remember what normal even felt like. It had only been a week in the hospital, but it stretched longer than that. Time moves differently when you're not in control of it. When someone else tells you when to eat, when to sleep, when you're allowed to leave. And then, just like that, you're back. Take it easy, they'd said. Rest. Someone will check in on you. I didn't think much of that last part at the time. Until 2 days later, when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't told many people I was back. Honestly, I wasn't in the mood to explain anything, to answer the same questions, give the same half answers. But the knock came again. Firm. Patient. I opened the door. And there he was. Trevor. It took my brain a second to place him outside the hospital setting. No scrubs, no constant background noise, no clipboard in his hand. Just a dark jacket, slightly messy hair, and that same calm expression I remembered from late-night check-ins. "Hey, Cole," he said, like this was completely normal. "You look better." I blinked at him. "Trevor." He gave a small smile. "In the flesh. What are you doing here?" He lifted one shoulder in a casual shrug. "Follow-up visit. They assigned someone to check on certain patients after discharge." I frowned. "At home." "Yeah," he said. "Not everyone gets it. You're special." I huffed a quiet laugh. That's one way to put it. There was a pause. Not awkward exactly, but uncertain. Like we were both adjusting to the fact that this conversation wasn't happening under fluorescent lights anymore. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "Yeah, sure." He walked in like he didn't want to disturb anything, eyes scanning the space briefly before settling somewhere neutral. I suddenly became very aware of the state of my apartment, not messy, but lived in a way that felt more personal than I was ready for. "Nice place," he said. "Thanks. It's mine." "Good start." That got a small smile out of me. He didn't pull out a clipboard, didn't immediately start asking clinical questions. Instead, he leaned lightly against the counter, like he was giving me space to set the tone. "So," he said, "how are you actually feeling?" Not the standard question. Not the kind you answer automatically. I crossed my arms, thinking about it. "Tired," I admitted. "But not just physically." He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. "That's normal. I feel like everything's slower," I added. "Like I'm supposed to just jump back into my life, but I don't really know how." Trevor's expression softened slightly. "You don't have to rush that." "That's easy to say." "Yeah," he agreed. "Harder to do." There was that thing I'd noticed about him in the hospital. He never talked like he was above it. Never gave those empty reassurances that sounded good but meant nothing. He just met you where you were. We talked for a while after that. About basic things at first: medication, sleep, whether I was eating properly. But it didn't stay surface level for long. It never really did with him. At one point, I realized I was leaning against the counter across from him, mirroring his posture without thinking about it. Like we'd settled into something familiar without needing to name it. "You always this quiet?" he asked suddenly. I glanced up. "What do you mean?" "In the hospital, you talked more," he said. "Not a lot, but more than this." I shrugged. "Different environment. Or different version of you." That caught me off guard. I let out a slow breath. "Maybe." He didn't push. Just nodded, like that answer was enough. After a while, he checked the time. I should probably go. Something about that felt disappointing. Which was ridiculous. He was a nurse doing his job. This wasn't a social visit. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." He headed toward the door, then paused, hand on the handle. "I'll be back in a couple of days," he said. I blinked. "You will?" "Yeah." Part of the follow-up. I nodded slowly. "Right." He opened the door, then looked back at me. "Take it easy, Cole," he said, a little softer this time. "You too." I replied automatically. And then he was gone. The apartment felt quiet again, but not in the same way as before. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, replaying the conversation in my head. The way he'd looked at me, not clinically, not distantly, just present. It didn't make sense why that stuck with me, but it did. Over the next 2 days, I found myself thinking about it more than I expected. About him. About the way the space didn't feel as empty when he was in it. And when the knock came again, right on time. I was already at the door before the second one. By the time I opened the door, Trevor was already lowering his hand like he knew I'd get there before he knocked again. That was fast, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I stepped back to let him in. I was nearby. Convenient. Very. There was a small pause, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It felt easier, like the second time around had stripped away some invisible layer between us. He walked in, taking off his jacket and draping it over the back of the same chair he'd used last time, like he remembered exactly where he'd been. "You look more awake," he said, glancing at me. "I slept," I replied. "More than before." "That's a good sign." I nodded, then leaned against the counter again, almost instinctively. He noticed I could tell by the way his eyes flicked to my posture for a second before settling back on my face. "So," he said, "how's the silence treating you?" I exhaled slowly, still loud. He gave a quiet, understanding nod. "Yeah, that doesn't go away overnight." "It's weird," I admitted. "In the hospital, I wanted out so badly. And now," I hesitated. "And now it feels like something's missing," he finished. I looked at him. "Yeah." He didn't smile, didn't make light of it. "That's normal too," he said. "Structure disappears, and suddenly you're left with everything you didn't have time to think about before." "Great," I muttered. "Sounds fun." He huffed a small laugh. "Didn't say it was fun." We moved through the usual check-in stuff after that, but again it didn't feel like a checklist. He asked questions, sure, but he listened to the answers in a way that made me actually think before speaking. At some point, I realized we'd drifted off topic completely. "What did you mean the other day?" he asked. "About what?" "Different version of you." I hesitated. "You don't let things go, do you?" "Not the ones that matter." That landed heavier than I expected. I looked down at my hands for a second, then back at him. "I don't know. In there, I didn't have to pretend I had everything under control. And out here," I gave a small, humorless smile. "Out here, that's kind of expected." "By who?" I didn't answer right away. "Everyone," I said eventually. Trevor tilted his head slightly. "Or by you." That caught me off guard again. "You always do that." I asked. "Do what?" "Turn things around like that." He shrugged lightly. "Only when it seems necessary." I shook my head, but there was no real frustration behind it. If anything, it felt like he was pulling things out of me I hadn't planned on saying out loud. "Maybe it is me," I admitted. "I don't know how to just be off." "You don't have to perform being okay," he said quietly. I met his eyes. There was something steady there. Not intense. Not overwhelming. Just steady. And for a second, I felt that same strange shift I'd noticed in the hospital during his late-night rounds. Like the world narrowed slightly when it was just the two of us talking. I cleared my throat, breaking the moment. "You say that like it's easy." "I didn't say that either," he replied. We both smiled, just a little. After that, the conversation softened again. Easier topics. Lighter ones. He told me about a ridiculous situation with a coworker, nothing dramatic, just enough to make me laugh in a way I hadn't since getting home. "You're different outside the hospital too," I said at one point. He raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah. Yeah. Less guarded, I guess." He considered that. "Work version of me." "Figured." "What about you?" he asked. "Which version am I getting right now?" I thought about it. "Somewhere in between," I said. He nodded like that made sense. Time passed faster than I expected again. At some point, he checked his watch, then looked back at me. "I should head out," he said. That same small drop in my chest again. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep it neutral. "Of course." He grabbed his jacket, slipping it on, but didn't rush to the door this time. "You're doing better," he said. "Not just physically." I shrugged. "Maybe. I mean it," he added. I nodded, quieter now. "Thanks." He stepped toward the door, then paused again, same as last time, but something about it felt more deliberate now. "I'm scheduled to come by again," he said. But, I asked. He glanced at me, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. "You don't have to wait for that if you need something," he said. "You can reach out." I frowned slightly. "Am I allowed to do that?" He smiled faintly. "You are now." There was something in the way he said it that didn't feel purely professional. Not crossing any lines, but close enough to notice. "Okay," I said. Another small pause. Then he nodded once and opened the door. "See you, Cole." "Yeah," I replied. "See you." After he left, I didn't just stand there this time. I moved around the apartment, opened a window, sat down, got up again, restless. Not because I felt worse, because something had shifted. I kept replaying that last part. You can reach out. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. And later that night, sitting on my couch with my phone in my hand, staring at a message I hadn't sent. I realized I was thinking about him in a way that had nothing to do with follow-up visits anymore. I didn't send the message. Not that night. But I didn't delete it either. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to name yet. I lasted exactly one more day before I texted him. I told myself it was practical, that I had a question, that this was literally what he said I could do. It still took me 10 minutes of staring at my phone before I hit send. Me. Hey, quick question about the meds timing you said morning, but does it matter how early? I watched the screen like something dramatic might happen. It didn't. Just the typing bubble. Then, Trevor. Hey, not super strict, just try to keep it consistent. Within an hour or so is fine. A pause. Then another message. Trevor, you good? I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Me. Yeah, just making sure I'm not messing it up. 3 dots again. Trevor, you're not. That should have been the end of it. But I didn't put my phone down. And neither did he. Trevor, how's today been? I leaned back into the couch, staring at the message longer than necessary. Honest answer? Slow. Quiet. A little too inside my own head. What I typed. Me. Better than yesterday. Not a lie. Just not the whole truth. Trevor. That's progress. Something about that made me smile slightly. We kept talking after that. Nothing intense. Nothing too deep. Just small things, what I'd eaten, whether I'd gone outside, him mentioning a long shift and a patient who kept trying to bargain for extra pudding cups like it was a high-stakes negotiation. It felt easy. Too easy. At some point, I realized we'd been texting for almost an hour. I hesitated, then typed. Me. Is this part of the follow-up too? The reply came quicker this time. Trevor. Depends. You complaining? I huffed a quiet laugh. Me. Not really. A few seconds. Trevor. Then I guess it's fine. That line stuck with me more than it should have. Because it wasn't formal. Wasn't distant. It felt like a choice. After that, it became a thing. Not constant. Not overwhelming. Just present. He'd text sometimes in the evening. Short check-ins. Random comments. Once, a picture of something dumb from the hospital break room with the caption, "This feels illegal, but I respect it." I started expecting it. Which was dangerous. Because it stopped feeling like he was just assigned to me. And started feeling like he was choosing to be there. A few days later, he came by again. This time, when I opened the door, he smiled immediately. Hey, he said. Hey. There was no hesitation anymore when I stepped aside to let him in. No awkward adjustment period. It just fit. You've been outside, he said, glancing at my shoes by the door. Yeah, I replied. Short walk. Voluntary. I rolled my eyes. Barely. He laughed under his breath. Still counts. We settled into the same positions as before without thinking, me by the counter, him leaning slightly against it, facing me. You look better, he added. You said that last time. I meant it then too. I shook my head, but I couldn't stop the small smile. There was a pause. Not empty. Just comfortable. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't waiting for him to ask questions anymore. I just started talking. I almost didn't text you, I admitted. His brow lifted slightly. Oh yeah. Yeah. Felt weird. Why? I shrugged. Didn't want to. I don't know. Cross some invisible line. He considered that for a second. You didn't, he said. How do you know? He held my gaze. Because I answered. That did something to my chest I couldn't quite explain. I looked away first. Fair enough, I muttered. We moved through the check-in again, but it felt lighter this time. Less like something structured. More like a reason for him to be there. At one point, he glanced around the apartment again. Feels different in here, he said. How? Less heavy. I leaned back slightly. I opened the windows. That'll do it. I hesitated, then added, also not sitting in silence all day anymore. His eyes flicked back to mine. Good. We held that look for a second too long. I felt it. That shift again. Subtle, but real. I cleared my throat. So, how bad was your shift today? He exhaled like I'd given him an exit. You don't want to know. I kind of do. Trust me, you don't. I smirked. That bad. That, and weirdly specific. Now I definitely want to know. He shook his head, but he was smiling. And just like that, the moment softened again. When he finally got ready to leave, it didn't feel abrupt anymore. Just like something that would continue later. At the door, he paused again, but this time, I didn't wait for him to say something first. You'll text? I asked. It slipped out before I could overthink it. His expression shifted slightly. Not surprised. Just aware. Yeah, he said. I will. I nodded. Okay. Another small pause. Then he added, quieter. You can too. I held his gaze for a second, then nodded again. Yeah, I said. I know. He left after that. And this time, when the door closed, the apartment didn't feel quiet in that empty way anymore. It felt like something had been left behind. Not physically, but enough that I caught myself checking my phone later that night without even thinking. And when his name lit up the screen again, I didn't hesitate before answering. At some point, it stopped feeling like check-ins. I didn't notice exactly when it happened. Just that one evening, I was sitting on my couch, phone in my hand, scrolling through messages and realized none of our recent conversations had anything to do with medication, sleep, or recovery. It was just us talking. That should have been a sign. Maybe it was. I just didn't do anything about it. Trevor came by again 2 days later, but this time it felt different before I even opened the door. I don't know how to explain it. Just awareness. Like I already knew I was going to notice things I hadn't let myself notice before. When I opened the door, he gave me that same small smile. Hey, hey. But instead of stepping back immediately, I stayed where I was for a second too long. And he noticed. Of course he did. You gonna let me in? He said lightly. Or are we having the conversation out here? I huffed a quiet laugh and moved aside. Right? Yeah. He walked in, slower this time, like he was picking up on something too. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Then, after a second, I think so. He didn't push it, just nodded and set his jacket down like usual. But the energy had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that everything felt a little sharper. We didn't go straight into the usual routine. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me for a second like he was waiting for me to say something first. So I did. I was thinking, I started. Dangerous. I rolled my eyes. Shut up. He smiled, but didn't interrupt again. I was thinking, this doesn't really feel like a follow-up anymore. There it was. Out loud. Trevor didn't react immediately, which somehow made it worse. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah. Just yeah. No denial. No correction. My chest tightened slightly. Is that a problem? He looked at me properly then. No, he said. It's just something we should probably acknowledge. I swallowed. Okay. Another pause. He shifted his weight slightly, like he was choosing his next words carefully. There's a line, he said. You know that? Yeah. And he exhaled quietly, getting close to it. Are we crossing it? I asked. His eyes held mine. Not yet. Not yet. That shouldn't have sounded like relief. But it did. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then, almost deliberately, he straightened slightly. All right, he said, tone shifting just enough. Let's do the actual check-in before we get ourselves in trouble. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Right? Yeah. Professional. Very. It was lighter again, but not the same. We went through the motions, but both of us were more aware now. Every glance lasted a fraction longer. Every pause felt heavier. At one point, I caught him watching me instead of writing something down on his phone. What? I asked. Nothing. That didn't look like nothing. He hesitated. Then, you're different today. I leaned back slightly. You said that before. I mean it differently this time. I frowned. How? He held my gaze for a second. More present, he said. Less like you're holding something back. That hit closer than I expected. Maybe I'm just tired of doing that, I admitted. He nodded slowly. Yeah. Another one of those moments. The kind that didn't need to be filled. When we finished, neither of us moved right away. Usually, that was his cue to leave. This time he stayed. You ever get used to this? I asked quietly. To what? This, in-between feeling, I said. Like things are shifting, but you don't know what they're shifting into yet. He didn't answer immediately. Then, yeah, he said, but not in a comfortable way. I huffed softly. Great. He smiled a little. You get better at recognizing it, though. Recognizing what? When something matters, he said. That landed. Heavy. Clear. I looked at him, trying to figure out if he realized what he'd just implied. He did. I could see it. But he didn't take it back. The air felt different again. Thicker. Quieter. I shifted slightly, closing some of the space between us without fully thinking it through. He didn't step back. Trevor, I said, a little quieter now. Yeah. I hesitated. Then, if this wasn't your job, would you still come by? There it was. No easy way to soften that. No pretending it was casual. He looked at me for a long second. Too long to be neutral. Yes, he said. No hesitation. No qualifiers. Just yes. My chest tightened. Okay, I said softly. We didn't move. Didn't break eye contact. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden shift. Just a quiet understanding settling between us. And then, like he remembered where we were, Trevor stepped back. Slightly. Not far. Just enough. I should go, he said. His voice was steady, but not distant. Yeah, I replied. Neither of us sounded fully convinced. He grabbed his jacket, slower than usual. At the door, he paused again. Same as every time. But this one felt heavier. Cole, he said. Yeah. He hesitated. Then, be careful with this. I knew what he meant. Yeah, I said. You too. Another pause. Then he nodded once and left. That night, I didn't just think about him. I replayed everything. The way he said yes. The way neither of us denied what was happening. The fact that neither of us stopped it either. And lying there in the quiet, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit yet. This wasn't just comfort anymore. It wasn't just familiarity. It was becoming something else. Something real. And a lot harder to ignore. After that conversation, things didn't go back to normal. They couldn't. Once something is said out loud, once it's acknowledged, you don't get to pretend it isn't there anymore. And we didn't. We just didn't rush it either. The next day, I didn't text him. Not because I didn't want to. Because I wanted to see if he would. It felt stupid. Petty, even. But after everything that had been left hanging between us, I needed to know if that yes actually meant something or if it had just been a moment. By late afternoon, I was checking my phone more than I wanted to admit. By evening, I told myself to drop it. And then, Trevor, how's today? I stared at the message for a second longer than necessary. There it was. Simple, but intentional. Me. Quiet. You? A minute passed. Trevor. Long shift. Thinking about not being at work. I smiled slightly at that. Me. Sounds healthy. Trevor. Very professional of me, I know. I hesitated. Then. Me. You're allowed to not be professional all the time. 3 dots. Stopped. Started again. Trevor. Careful. My chest tightened just a little. Me. You said that already. Trevor. And I meant it. I leaned back into the couch, staring at that message. So did I? I just didn't say it out loud. When he came by again, it wasn't officially scheduled. That was the first real difference. The knock came later than usual, closer to evening. I opened the door, and Trevor was standing there in casual clothes again, no work bag this time. You weren't supposed to come today, I said. I know. That was it. No explanation. And somehow, that said more than anything else could have. I stepped aside without another word. He walked in, slower this time, like he wasn't sure what the rules were anymore. Neither was I. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said. You? He nodded. Yeah. But he didn't move further into the apartment right away. Just stood there, looking at me, like we were both waiting for the other one to define what this was now. You came anyway, I said quietly. Yeah. Why? That question hung there. He could have dodged it. Could have made it about routine, about checking in, about anything safe. He didn't. Because I wanted to see you, he said. Simple. Direct. No room to misunderstand. My chest tightened again, sharper this time. Okay, I said, softer now. He exhaled slightly, like that mattered. Like my reaction mattered. We didn't go to the counter this time. Didn't fall into the usual pattern. Instead, we stayed in the middle of the room, a few steps apart, neither of us pretending this was just another visit. You look better, he said again. I almost laughed. You're running out of lines. Maybe you're just consistently improving. Or maybe you just keep noticing. That slipped out before I could filter it. He didn't look away. No, he said quietly. I just keep noticing. That silence again. But heavier. More aware. I crossed my arms, more to ground myself than anything else. So what are we doing? He tilted his head slightly. You want a clear answer? I think we passed the point where vague works. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. We're figuring it out. I huffed softly. That's not a real answer. It's an honest one. I couldn't argue with that. Still didn't make it easier. There's still a line, he added. I know. And it still matters. Yeah. We stood there, both acknowledging it again. And still, not stepping away. At some point, I moved first. Not much. Just a step closer. But it changed everything. Trevor didn't move back. Didn't close the distance either. Just stayed, letting me decide how far this went. You said we weren't crossing it, I said quietly. His voice was just as low. We haven't. Feels like we're right on it. Yeah. Another step closer. Now there was barely any space between us. Not touching, but close enough that I was aware of everything: his breathing, the way his shoulders tensed slightly, the way he was holding himself back. "You gonna stop me?" I asked. He shook his head once. "No." That was it. That was all it took. I reached for him first. Not rushed, not unsure, just clear. My hand caught his wrist lightly, like I was giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. He didn't. Instead, his fingers shifted slightly under mine, just enough to acknowledge it. "Trevor," I said, quieter now. "Yeah." This is where it changes. I know. Neither of us moved away. Neither of us broke it. And when he finally stepped that last inch closer, it didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like we'd already been standing on it for too long. We kissed. No hesitation. No confusion. Just quiet certainty. When we pulled back, nothing snapped back into place. Nothing reset. If anything, everything felt clearer. More real. Trevor rested his forehead briefly against mine, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. I let out a small, breathless laugh. "Yeah." We stayed like that for a second, not rushing to move, not pretending it didn't just happen. Then he stepped back slightly. Not far, just enough to look at me properly. "We're definitely past it now," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, we are." There was no panic in it. No regret. Just truth. The rest of that evening wasn't dramatic. No big declarations. No sudden shift into something overwhelming. We just existed in it. Talked. Laughed. Sat closer than before without thinking about it. Like something had unlocked, and neither of us wanted to rush what came next. But when he finally left, standing at the door, same as always. It didn't feel like a question anymore. It felt like a beginning. And as the door closed behind him, I knew this wasn't something we could pretend was temporary. Not anymore. The next morning felt different. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way everything was a little sharper. More defined. I woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night before, not obsessively, not like I was looking for mistakes. Just going over it. The moment. The way neither of us pulled back. The way it didn't feel like something we'd regret. That was the part that stuck. No panic. No second guessing. Just quiet certainty. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't even have to look to know it was him. "Trevor." "Morning." I stared at it for a second, then smiled slightly. "Me." "Morning." A few seconds passed. "Trevor, you okay?" I leaned back into the pillow, exhaling slowly. "Me." "Yeah." "You?" Typing bubble. Stopped. Started again. "Trevor." "Yeah." Short, but not distant. Just careful. I understood that. Because I felt it too. We didn't text much after that. Not like before. Not because anything was wrong. Because now there was something real sitting between us, and neither of us wanted to handle it carelessly. He didn't come by that day. Or the next. That was new. And I noticed. Not in a way that made me spiral, but enough that I was aware of the absence. Before, I would have told myself it was just scheduling. Now, I knew it was more than that. We were both thinking. On the third day, he finally showed up again. This time, when I opened the door, neither of us smiled right away. Not because it wasn't good to see each other. Because it mattered more now. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a pause. Longer than usual. Then I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked in slower than before, glancing around like he was grounding himself. "You've been quiet," I said. He nodded. "Yeah." "On purpose." Another nod. "Yeah." I crossed my arms, leaning lightly against the wall this time instead of the counter. "You gonna tell me why?" He exhaled slowly. "I needed to think," he said. About what we're doing." "Fair." I nodded once. "And?" He looked at me then. Direct. Steady. "I don't want this to be something that only exists in here," he said. My chest tightened slightly. "In here?" I asked. He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "This space. These visits. This bubble." I understood immediately. "You think it will be?" I asked. "I think it could be," he said honestly. "If we're not careful." That word again. Careful. "Is that what you want?" I asked. He shook his head without hesitation. "No." Silence settled between us. But not the uncertain kind. The kind where something important is about to land. "I meant what I said," he added. "I would have come here even if this wasn't my job." "I know," I said quietly. "And now that it's not just my job anymore," he continued, "I don't want to blur it into something unclear." I watched him carefully. "So don't," I said. His brow furrowed slightly. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Because there are still boundaries that matter, he said. Even if we crossed one. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. So what are you saying? He stepped a little closer. Not all the way. Just enough to close some of the distance. I'm saying I don't want to keep pretending this is just follow-ups, he said. But I also don't want to mess this up by rushing into something undefined. That made sense. Too much sense. So we define it, I said. He held my gaze. Yeah, he said. We do. There was a shift then. Subtle, but solid. Like we'd both stepped onto the same ground instead of circling around it. This doesn't stay just here, I said. No, he agreed. And it's not just something that happened once. No. And we don't pretend it didn't happen when you leave. His expression softened slightly. No, he said again. I nodded. Okay. We stood there for a second. Then I asked, quieter now, so what is it? He let out a small breath, almost like a laugh. I was hoping you'd answer that. I smirked slightly. No chance. He shook his head, but there was a hint of relief in it. All right, he said. Then we don't label it yet. But it's real, I added. Yeah, he said. It's real. That was enough. For now. This time, when we moved closer, it wasn't hesitant. Still not rushed, but not uncertain either. When we kissed again, it felt different than the first time. Less like crossing something. More like continuing. Like we already knew where this was going, even if we hadn't said it out loud yet. Later, sitting side by side, closer than before, I glanced at him. So what happens when your shifts change? I asked. He looked at me. What do you mean? You won't have an excuse to come by anymore. He held my gaze for a second. Then I won't need one, he said. That settled something in my chest. Completely. When he left that night, it didn't feel uncertain. Didn't feel like we were standing on the edge of something fragile. It felt like we'd finally stopped pretending this was temporary. And as I closed the door behind him, I realized something else. He wasn't just the nurse who checked on me anymore. And I wasn't just someone he was assigned to. Whatever this was, we were both choosing it now. After that, things didn't slow down. But they didn't rush either. They just settled. In a way that felt unfamiliar, but right. Trevor stopped pretending his visits were part of anything official. He didn't say it out loud, but it showed in small ways. No more structured check-ins. No more, how are you feeling, as the first question every time he walked in. Now it was just, hey, hey, and everything else came after. A few days later, he texted me in the middle of the afternoon. Trevor, you busy later? I looked at the message longer than necessary. That was new. Not a check-in. Not casual. Intentional. Me. No. Why? A few seconds. Trevor. Thought we could go out. Out. I sat up a little straighter without realizing it. Me. Out where? Trevor. Somewhere that isn't your apartment. I smiled. There it was. That line he'd talked about not letting this stay inside one space. Me. Yeah. I'd like that. I spent way too long getting ready. Which was stupid. It wasn't like this was some big formal thing. But it felt like one anyway. Because it was the first time this existed outside. When he knocked, I didn't open the door immediately. Not because I wasn't ready. Because I needed a second to steady myself. Then I opened it. Trevor looked the same. But not at the same time. More relaxed. Less like he was stepping into something complicated. Hey, he said. Hey. His eyes flicked over me briefly, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, just noticing. You ready? He asked. Yeah. We didn't go anywhere fancy. Just a small place, quiet enough to talk, busy enough that it didn't feel like everyone was watching. Still, I was aware of everything, of sitting across from him instead of standing in my apartment, of the way this looked from the outside, of the fact that this was real now, not contained, not hidden. You're thinking too much, Trevor said. I blinked. What? He smirked slightly. You get that look when you're in your head. I do not. You do. I shook my head, but he wasn't wrong. Just adjusting, I admitted. He nodded. Yeah, me too. That helped. More than it should have. Conversation came easier after that. Not heavy. Not overly careful. Just normal. We talked about things that had nothing to do with the hospital. About where we grew up. About dumb habits. About how he almost quit his job once because of a coworker who microwaved fish every day like it was acceptable behavior. You didn't, I said. I almost did. That's insane. So is reheated fish in a shared space. I laughed, actually laughed, and it felt different than before. Lighter. At one point, there was a pause. Not awkward. Just quiet. Trevor looked at me for a second. You seem better, he said. I tilted my head slightly. You keep saying that. Because it's still true. I leaned back in my chair. Or maybe I'm just not stuck in my apartment anymore. That's part of it, he said. And the other part? I asked. He didn't look away. You're not doing this alone anymore. That hit. Harder than I expected. I didn't respond right away. Just nodded. Because he was right. After we left, we walked for a bit. No destination. Just moving. It wasn't forced. Didn't feel like we needed to fill space with constant talking. At some point, our hands brushed. Not intentional. But neither of us pulled away immediately either. I glanced at him. He glanced back. There was a small pause. Then, naturally, our fingers intertwined. Simple. Easy. Like it didn't need to be a big moment. And somehow, that made it feel bigger. Still think we should be careful? I asked quietly. He exhaled softly. Yeah. But I don't think careful means pretending this isn't happening. I nodded. That's good, I said. Yeah. Because that was exactly what I needed to hear. When we got back to my building, neither of us rushed to end it. We stood there for a second. Same as before, but different. No uncertainty this time. No question about whether this was real. Good idea, I said. Going out. He nodded. Yeah. Your idea? Yeah. I smiled slightly. Keep having those. He smiled back. Then, after a brief pause, we kissed again. Short. Natural. Like it belonged there. When I went back inside, the apartment didn't feel like something I was stuck in anymore. It just felt like home. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about what might go wrong. I was thinking about what this could actually become. Because now, it wasn't just something that happened between visits. It wasn't just something growing quietly in one space. It was out in the open, real, and moving forward. Not because it had to, because we both wanted it to. It didn't turn into something dramatic. No sudden shift. No moment where everything changed all at once. It just kept going. And somehow, that made it feel more real than anything else could have. Trevor started coming over without knocking as carefully as before. Not in a careless way. Just familiar. Like he belonged there. Like I expected him to be there. And I did. One evening, he showed up after a long shift, clearly tired but still present in that way he always was with me. You look exhausted, I said, letting him in. I am, he admitted. Then why are you here? He stepped inside, kicking off his shoes. Because I wanted to be. Simple. Consistent. Always the same answer. And every time, it landed just as strong. We didn't do anything special that night. No going out. No big conversations. Just sat together, talking about nothing important. And at some point, the conversation faded into quiet. Not awkward. Not empty. Just comfortable. Trevor leaned his head back against the couch, eyes closing briefly. You ever think about how weird this started? I asked. He opened one eye slightly. All the time. I smirked. You showing up at my door like it was part of your job. It was part of my job. Yeah, I said. At first. He turned his head slightly to look at me. Not anymore. There it was again. That clarity. No hesitation. No confusion. I shifted slightly closer, resting back into the couch. For what it's worth, I said, I'm glad you did. Yeah, he asked. Yeah. He studied me for a second, like he was making sure I meant it. I am too, he said. There was a pause. Then he added, quieter this time. I almost didn't come that first day. That caught me off guard. Why not? He hesitated. Then, long shift. Could have passed it to someone else. I frowned slightly. But you didn't. He shook his head. No. Why? He held my gaze. Something about you felt. He stopped, searching for the word. Different, he finished. I let out a small breath. Funny, I said. I thought the same thing about you. That made him smile. Not a big one. Just real. We sat there for a while after that. No need to fill the space. No need to question where this was going anymore. Because at some point, we'd already answered that. Later, when he stood up to leave, it didn't feel like an ending. Not even a pause. Just part of the rhythm. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. Not a question, but still waiting for the answer. Yeah, I replied. You will. He nodded. Then, before leaving, he leaned in and kissed me simple, familiar, like it had already become part of us. No hesitation. No second guessing. After the door closed, I didn't stand there wondering what this was. Didn't replay conversations looking for meaning. Didn't question whether it was real. Because I already knew. A few weeks ago, I'd stood in the same apartment feeling like everything was too quiet. Like I didn't know how to move forward. Like I was stuck somewhere between what happened and what came next. Now, it didn't feel like that anymore. The quiet wasn't empty. It was steady, and I wasn't alone in it. Trevor didn't just check on me after I left the hospital. He stayed, not because he had to, because he chose to. And somewhere between those first visits and everything that came after, I stopped feeling like I was recovering from something and started feeling like I was actually living again. And this time, it wasn't something temporary. It wasn't something hidden. It wasn't something uncertain. It was real, and it was ours.